Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering Bungie collapses, massive layoff at Halo and Destiny game studio. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from The Hollywood Reporter, Halo and Destiny game studio Bungie to cut hundreds of jobs. The Sony-owned studio cited industry shifts as well as enduring economic conditions in its decision to cut 17% of its workforce. If you're a company and you cut like 17% of your workforce, that is not a good sign. 17% is very close to 1 out of 5 people. If you work at a company, seeing 1 out of 5 people disappear is an absolute tragedy. And this kind of thing happens to companies time and time again when they don't focus on exactly what customers want. Even when they do focus on what customers want, they don't always get it right. And sometimes companies are not able to give customers what they want because it's actually hard to make the thing that customers see is high value for them. That's why it's difficult to run a company in the first place. But injecting in all this diversity, equity, and inclusion and woke nonsense into their games and distancing themselves from their customer base is a guaranteed recipe for failure. From that Park Place, former World of Warcraft team lead Mark Kern reacts to layoffs at Destiny developer Bungie, saying they were self-inflicted. First from The Hollywood Reporter. The video game industry continues to feel the pinch of layoffs. On Wednesday, the Sony-owned studio Bungie told employees that it will be cutting 17% of its workforce, or about 220 people. Quote, these actions will affect every level of the company, including most of our executive and senior leader roles, according to Bungie CEO Pete Parsons, who just told this to his staff. In a move reminiscent of layoffs that have recently impacted other studios, Parsons said that Bungie will focus its efforts on fewer, more impactful projects moving forward. An impactful project would be a project that consumers actually like, something they would see offered that they would then say, oh, you know what, that's worth my money. Quote, due to rising costs of development and industry shifts, as well as enduring economic conditions, it has become clear that we need to make substantial changes to our cost structure and focus development efforts entirely on Destiny and Marathon, he wrote. Bungie was founded in the early 1990s, developing games like Marathon and Myth, but it broke out in 1999 with the creation of the franchise Halo, now also a TV series on Paramount+. The company would go on to be acquired by Microsoft, where it would develop multiple sequels in the combat franchise. Bungie would split from Microsoft in 2007 and would go on to develop the Destiny franchise. Sony acquired Bungie in 2022. The video game industry writ large has undergone substantial layoffs this year because they're pushing all sorts of nonsense into video games. And I get this question often. Will we see a turnaround at the video game companies? Will they start to recognize that pushing this diversity nonsense and not focusing on creating value for the gamers just doesn't work for the gamers and it doesn't work for the company? I think the answer is yes. It's impossible to say when, but you can see the turnaround at Disney with Pixar. With Pixar and Inside Out 2, you can see the turnaround with Marvel with Deadpool and Wolverine. Even the worst of the worst companies are starting to understand they can't just do whatever they want. They do have to listen to customers. In January, Microsoft laid off 1,900 employees, with Activision Blizzard hit particularly hard, while League of Legends studio Riot Games slashed more than 500 jobs. In February, Sony cut 900 jobs in its gaming division, and Electronic Arts cut 650 jobs and cut upcoming games, including a Star Wars game. Take-Two Interactive cut 5% of its workforce in April and announced plans to cut multiple projects. In his memo to employees, Parsons added that the company will also integrate about 12% of its workforce into Sony Interactive, enabling us together to save a great deal of talent that would otherwise have been affected by the reduction in force. Quote, this will be a challenging time at Bungie, and we'll need to help our team navigate these changes in the weeks and months ahead, he added. This will be a hard week, and we know that our team will need time to process, to ask questions, and to absorb this news. This company is going to be rattled for a long time. You can't just cut around 1 out of 5 of all the employees with really nothing positive to say, really nothing positive to plan for in the future, and not completely devastate the morale of a company that was already devastated. Going back to December 2023, Bungie developers say atmosphere is soul-crushing amid layoffs and fear of total Sony takeover. Well, as the CEO literally just said, he's moving a lot of the employees under Sony's division. That is the future of this. That's what makes this viable for Sony. Get rid of Bungie as an independent entity, save all your expenses, save all your costs, get rid of a lot of the people, and whatever they have that they can use that might still be good. That's how big companies usually operate anyway. The only reason to leave a little company alone if you acquire a little company and let that little company do its own thing, manage its own people, is if it's successful on its own. If it's so magical and so incredible and unique, and they have such an incredible workforce, and they produce such products that are just so in demand, then those little companies can continue to have independence even if you're bought by a big company, because they don't want to mess with success. When the success is clearly gone, that's the end of the independence for that little company. From thatparkplace.com, former World of Warcraft team lead Mark Kern reacts to layoffs at Destiny developer Bungie, saying they were self-inflicted. Former World of Warcraft team lead Mark Kern, also known as Grummz, reacted to Destiny developer Bungie announcing it was laying off around 70% of its staff, claiming the layoffs were self-inflicted. And a team lead in the video game industry is somebody who's an industry expert. Bungie CEO and chairman Pete Parsons announced the layoffs in a blog post stating, quote, "Due to rising costs of development and industry shifts as well as enduring economic conditions, it's become clear we need to make substantial changes to our cost structure." Yeah, that's the beginning of the end of their independence. He then declared, "That means beginning today, 220 of our roles will be eliminated, representing 70% of our studio's workforce. These actions will affect every level of the company, including most of our executive and senior leader roles." Next, the CEO explained two other changes the company would be making. Quote, "First, we are deepening our integration with Sony Interactive Entertainment, working to integrate 155 of our roles, roughly 12%, into Sony over the next few quarters. Sony has worked tirelessly with us to identify roles for as many of our people as possible, enabling us together to save a great deal of talent that would otherwise have been affected by the reduction in force. They were going to lay off even more, so some people will get to continue to work for Sony, but no longer work for Bungie. This means the collapse at Bungie would have been much, much larger. 155 people on top of 220 people. That would have represented almost 30% of their entire employee base disappearing. So far, it's just 17% because they found other jobs for people at Sony for 12% of what would have been 29% of their entire workforce. That's equivalent to 1 out of 3 people that are not going to be continuing at Bungie. Quote, "Second, we are working with PlayStation Studios leadership to spin out one of our incubation projects, an action game set in a brand new science fiction fantasy universe, to form a new studio with PlayStation Studios to continue its promising development," he added. So it looks like rather than working on their own projects, they'll start to focus on working with PlayStation Studios, at least for a large portion of the remaining employees. What percentage of their workforce is going to be working on what looks like a joint venture with PlayStation Studios? We don't know. But probably at least 5 to 10% of their people, if they didn't have that deal with PlayStation, those people would have been laid off. Parsons then went on to explain how Bungie got to the point where it appears to be completely imploding. Quote, "For over 5 years, it's been our goal to ship games in 3 enduring global franchises. To realize that ambition, we set up several incubation projects, each seated with senior development leaders from our existing teams. We eventually realized that this model stretched our talent too thin, too quickly. It also forced our studio support structures to scale to an even larger level than we could realistically support, given our 2 primary products in development, Destiny and Marathon. Which is to say that the mismanagement on this is worse than the diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's the diversity nonsense on top of ridiculous mismanagement. Because when you run something, and you've been running it for years, you kind of know what you can get out of development staff. It's a new company mistake to go ahead and overexpand, to get beyond what your employees can actually do. You can't do the same thing with 250 employees that you could do with 25 employees times 10. There's a different management structure. There are different conflicts and issues that come up as soon as your staff starts to go up. That's one of the things that I learned when I was a kid running my company. But it's surprising to see a big company like this make a mistake like this. But big companies do make mistakes like this all the time. Quote, "Additionally, in 2023, our rapid expansion ran headlong into a broad economic slowdown, a sharp downturn in the games industry. our quality miss with Destiny 2 Lightfall, and the need to give both the final shape and Marathon the time needed to ensure both projects deliver at the quality our players expect and deserve. We were overly ambitious, our financial safety margins were subsequently exceeded, and we began running in the red. After this new trajectory became clear, we knew we had to change our course and speed, and we did everything we could to avoid today's outcome Parsons wrote. Even with exhaustive efforts undertaken across our leadership and product teams to resolve our financial challenges, these steps were simply not enough. As a result, today we must say goodbye to incredible talent, colleagues, and friends. Despite these massive layoffs and the apparent gutting of the studio, Parsons attempted to be optimistic. Quote, Bungie will continue to make great games. We still have over 850 team members we haven't fired yet, building Destiny and Marathon, and we will continue to build amazing experiences that exceed our players' expectations. I added the part about them not firing them yet, but that is to come. Or realistically, they'll be merged into Sony because this type of mismanagement is complete nonsense. It's one thing to damage all of your brands with DEI. It's another thing to not know how to run teams to produce things that you've been producing for years. Complete rookie mistake. Quote, there will be a time to talk about our goals and projects, but today is not that day. Today, our focus is on supporting our people, he concluded. Former World of Warcraft team lead Mark Kern, aka Grummz, reacted to these layoffs, writing on Twitter, Bungie layoffs were self-inflicted. A lot of Destiny players moved on to First Ascendant, which currently has double the number of players online on PC alone. Bungie celebrated Pride and called critics bigots. First Ascent celebrates Summer instead. Grummz previously detailed that, quote, Bungie became incredibly political and woke over the years, while the quality of their DLC started to slip dramatically. He continued, DEI, which emphasizes checkbox hiring over merit, has profound impacts on a studio. When you start promoting and hiring activists, the product suffers. What's happening at Bungie is terrible, but many studios also realize that they took on too many activists, and the smart ones are prioritizing layoffs to trim this fat. He also noted that, quote, Destiny was losing money. Bungie was running at a loss prior to the layoffs. The layoffs were going to be around 500 people, but they managed to transfer 155 of them to Sony and 75 to start a new Sony studio. Most recently, Grummz shared that he believes Bungie should likely cut more people and pointed to Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter as an example. He wrote, AAA game budgets and team sizes are insane. Elon showed the way. Bungie and other AAA studios could cut deeper. Look at Bungie's Twitter feed, full of DEI activism. Then he quoted Musk. Quote, turns out you don't need many people. If you're not trying to run some sort of glorified activist organization, you can really let go of a lot of people, it turns out. To Grummz's point about the studio focusing on other things than making video games, the company made numerous posts on social media pushing LGBT lifestyles and transgender ideology. One in 2022 noted it was selling pride pins and would donate all the proceeds to advocates of trans equality. It can take a while and sometimes it takes too long, but eventually companies start to realize if they don't take care of their customers and put the company together in such a way that it's serving the customers who are actually giving money to the company starts to fail. The Bungie game studio is the latest example. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.